When you're a kid, everyone delights in telling you that your childhood years are the best of your life. At the time, you think they're full of shit. You have to get out of bed every morning and roll yourself into school, spending at least 6 hours a day learning things you're never going to need again once you graduate, and spend the entirety of the day surrounded by absolute morons you're supposed to call your peers. One of the most idiotic things about school is just how excited the teachers become when presenting to you how X equals Y on a faded blackboard. So faded, in fact, that it appears gray once they begin scrawling equations in chalk across its surface. And so old, you can see where a kid from years past used a pen to write, "Tenant is a wiener," knowing full well it would never be removed in its entirety. At home, you're badgered by parents, forced to eat vegetables and other foods you don't like, because otherwise you run the risk of enraging the hand that feeds you, and being sent to bed with an empty stomach. However, as you get older and spread your wings into real life, you realize that life isn't as great as you thought it'd be. You're not going to be the next John Wayne. You're actually going to lug heavy goods around in a warehouse for 8 hours straight, possibly longer if an unexpected bill lands on your doorstep. You sit behind a desk, crunching numbers for a guy that can't be bothered to do it himself, or you find your anxiety raise at the beginning of a shift, dreading the next 8 hours that are about to commence. That's when you pine away for the good old days. The days when a bill was something you got on your birthday, and when you had nothing to pay for, and your biggest worry was handing in your book review report for Mrs. Hodgkitt when you'd left it until the last minute. This type of homework I didn't mind doing. Every other kid in my class reviewed the basic novels such as Treasure Island, Alice in Wonderland, or some other literary classic that cemented itself a place in history. Not me, though. I remember my parents being called into school by Mrs. Hodgkitt because I'd chosen to review Robert Bloch's 1959 novel, Psycho. I didn't see anything wrong regaling my fellow 14-year-old students of Norman Bates' misdemeanors at the Bates Motel, but I guess most of the other 14-year-olds were not ready for that, especially when I began to explain the real-life case of Ed Gein who inspired the story. Yep, that got me a meeting with the principal, Mrs. Hodgett, and my parents. That became the first sign that I'd grow to love horror, and in particular the old Universal monster movies that would play out on television over the weekends late at night. I have many, many fond memories which I recall from my childhood, and everyone who told me these were the best years of my life were indeed correct. I also believe that your childhood is affected by those around you, and not only were my parents supportive of me and my wishes, but my friends were too. It's impossible to look upon your childhood without recalling your friends. Not the ones you saw at school and took a lesson with here and there, but those you sought out. Those you sat with at recess and walked home with. Those who came to your house and slept over. Those you saw for an entire weekend exploring the woods, building dens, and just hanging out with. I was lucky enough to have a group of friends like this, and I swear to God that no friends I have had ever since have been as good to me as those 3 kids. Chris Lester, Charlie Beaumont, Louis Johnson, and I were pretty much inseparable throughout our school years. We argued, of course, and fell out on many occasions, but it never lasted long. We stood together as a unit. You messed with one of us, you messed with all of us. It didn't matter what had happened or what the odds were. We stood together and never backed down. As a collective, we called ourselves the Wolf Pack. Now, this was years before that phrase became cool and trendy with the wrestling kids. Its name reflected our brotherhood and bond, so to speak, and something I took great pride in being part of. We coined the name from our behavior. I don't even know when it started, but we began howling like wolves whenever something good happened, or just when we were happy. It was nothing more than a quirk, but it separated us from everyone else. Of course, we never did any of that shit when people were around. We didn't want to gain the reputation as dorks among our peers.